So I've always loved scary stories and experiences. I love visiting these threads and asking my friends about their scariest experiences. Horror movies, stuff like that. However, recently I got an answer I really didn't expect. I was in the car with my mom and I decided to ask her about her scariest experiences. At first, she didn't really have an answer aside from doing stupid things as a kid. And even at that, she was a pretty good kid. Anyway, she did eventually come up with something. It was about me. She asked me if I remembered a trip our family and friends took together to some place in Canada, back when I was very young, maybe like 5 or 7. I'm really bad with ages though, so who knows? I very vaguely remember taking the train with our neighbors and crying to my parents about losing my coloring book. But that was pretty much it. She told me that on that trip we all got together and decided to shop and walk around the city. It was raining and altogether I'd say there was at least 10 of us. Back then I had this bright cherry red raincoat I loved to wear all the time, which is the most prominent memory I have out of this whole story. That jacket I loved so much. She told me that the streets were busy and with so many kids they kinda lost track of some of them. But after some time had passed, I was back in the group, them barely even realizing I had gone that far away for very long. I ran to my mom and told her where I had been. This is where I started to freak out a little as she told me this. She said that I ran up to her and told her that I had gotten lost in a crowd of people and had met a tall man in a hat. I said that he told me he really, really liked my jacket, and I was really happy because I was pretty proud of that jacket. I told my mom that he kept touching it and holding onto my shoulder, telling me how soft and nice it was. Apparently, even childhood me knew this was weird. I told my mom proudly how I sat there and stopped speaking to him, specifically recalling how she would always tell us to never speak to strangers. I told her how smart I was to have even remembered that, and that I waited until he let go or I could get away. I don't know how I ended up getting away, but I did. Now, I don't remember any of this happening at all, and I'm partly glad I don't. After she finished telling me the story, I broke down in nervous laughter. Had that man had the bad intentions I think he did? And if he had gone through with them successfully, who knows where I would be today? I'm so glad I got away, however I did it.
This story took place about 7 years ago when I was 15, now 22. My family had just moved to Florida from a small town in Georgia and knew nothing of the bad areas of our new town and didn't know that we had unknowingly moved into a townhouse in the sketchy part of town. One evening, after my dad had left me, my mum and 2 brothers to go to work, he works the graveyard shift, we got a knock on the door. I went to the door to investigate and saw a little girl curled up in a ball at our doorstep, sobbing and rocking back and forth. I asked her what was wrong through the door, but all she responded with was, "I need your help, please let me in." I immediately went and got my mum, who got my oldest brother, who was 17 at the time, and they went to the door, asking her what was wrong through the unopened door. She kept repeating the same thing over and over, saying she needed help and to let her in. My mother said she would call an ambulance for her, but that we could not let her in. My brother then proceeded to try and open the door to let the girl in, claiming we obviously needed to help her, but thankfully my mum slammed the door and told him not to. My mum told her that she had called an ambulance and that they were on their way to help her. The little girl then shot up from the ground, revealing it was actually a grown woman, and started cursing at my mum. "You bitch, I said I needed your help, not for you to call the police, you stupid bitch." At that moment, we heard sirens, and the police and an ambulance showed up. Later on, we found out that when the police were pulling up, they saw her running off and saw her throw a knife into the woods. The police told us that she more than likely had an accomplice with her, waiting round the corner for us to open the door so that they could come in and rob us, or much worse. I'm glad it didn't get that far, and even happier that the police caught her.
This is a true story that concerns both me and my sister. My sister was accepted into medical school in St. Louis, Missouri in 2014. She moved into a very cheap apartment, as it was all she could afford given the university's high tuition fees and expenses. The buildings in the apartment complex were very old and run down. The complex itself was in a very unsafe part of the city, and the surrounding area was very eerie and desolate. She told my parents that she felt uncomfortable in her apartment and would often feel as though she was being watched. My parents brushed her concerns off as nothing more than minor adjustment difficulties. After all, it was her first time living alone and being far away from home. As months passed, my sister's fears worsened, and she told my parents that she was having trouble sleeping as strange noises from outside her window would wake her up in the middle of the night. She was too terrified to investigate these noises, and instead kept her curtains closed and hid under the covers until she was able to go back to sleep. My parents became increasingly concerned for her well-being, and they asked me to fly out to St. Louis to keep her company for a few days. Spring break had just begun and I had enough time to kill, so I didn't mind. She let me crash on her couch for the week. At first, I didn't notice anything unusual or strange about the apartment. Sure, it wasn't the nicest apartment that I had seen, but there wasn't anything particularly frightening about it. One night, she woke up and told me she was hearing noises from outside her bedroom window again. I was still half asleep, but I told her I would check it out for her. When I got to her room, I heard what sounded like footsteps and tree branches hitting the window. I quickly opened the curtains and peered outside. I couldn't see anything because it was completely dark. My iPhone had a flashlight app, so I opened the window and held my phone outside. I slowly moved it back and forth. I froze upon seeing a man staring right back at me. His face was pale and he was wearing a hooded jacket. He stood there, smiling feverishly at me. I heard a scream from behind me and I almost dropped my phone. I turned around and looked at my sister. She was petrified. When I looked back outside, he had vanished. I called the police and reported the incident. They searched the premises but found no sign of the man. The officers told us that the man we had seen matched a description of a suspect that was wanted for questioning in the disappearance and murder of 2 females from St. Louis, but they had never been able to get in contact with him. My sister was extremely frightened, and we both boarded the next plane home that night. My sister was too traumatized to return back to school, let alone the apartment. She decided to take time off from school and stay at home for a while before eventually resuming her studies at a medical school closer to home. I'm glad that she is safe and far away from the man. It still bothers me that he was never found, and I don't even want to imagine what would have happened if my sister stayed in that apartment all by herself.
Summer 1981. I was 16 years old at the time, living in San Antonio, Texas. I didn't want to be stuck at the house. My brother Mark was 22 years old, married, and a distance truck driver with over 3 years of experience. Mark and his wife went to visit my parents and I the day before he headed out for his next delivery. Wanting to get away from my parents, I asked Mark if I could come along with him on his trip. He said yes without hesitation. I haven't really spent that much time with him in a while anyway, so this would be a great way to catch up, just 2 guys on the open road. Mark was working for a big name car company that delivered vehicle parts all throughout Texas. This one delivery list had us going through a lot of the bigger towns and smaller cities in the South Texas region. We set off on our trip at 8 a.m. the next morning. His wife also went, so it was not exactly what I expected, but it was still nice to be with him. He had a bed in his truck, so that's where I sat the entire trip, while they were safely buckled in their seats. We began our deliveries from San Antonio, worked our way down to Kingsville, and had Corpus Christi as our final stop before making our way back home. It was just past 10 p.m. when we left our final stop down in Corpus. It was going to be about a 2-hour drive on the Interstate 37 to get back home, so I decided to take a nap on the bed. I woke up to Mark's wife shaking me. The truck wasn't moving. "Wake up!" I looked at the clock. It was 11:13 p.m. I nervously asked, "What's going on?" "This couple outside, their car broke down and your brother's stopped to help. Go see if he needs anything." I got off the truck. It's dark outside. Aside from the truck's headlights and flashlight my brother is holding under the hood of this 1960-something car. As I'm walking towards my brother, I notice we're on an overpass. A sudden cool breeze shook me just a little bit. I see an old Hispanic couple, maybe in their late 60s, with my brother looking at the engine. The old man looks up at me. We just came back from a wedding in Mathis and started having trouble with the car. I didn't know what to say other than, "Oh man." His wife just smiled and stared at me for a good 5 seconds. Didn't even blink. Mark was shaking, as though it was freezing, but it was at least 80 degrees out. After about 15 minutes or so, Mark, in a nervous voice, offered the old couple a ride since we couldn't figure out the problem. We only live about 6 miles down the road, in Swinney Switch. We get back in the truck. I get in first on the passenger side and sit on the bed next to Mark's wife. I watch Mark enter the driver's side, still shaking. Under the cab light, I can see he's pale, almost sick looking. Back on the passenger's side, the old woman is being helped up by her husband. Then he struggles a bit to get himself up and in. The old woman waited for her husband to sit on the passenger seat. She then slowly rests herself on his lap. Mark puts the truck in gear. We move slowly and drive off. From my position, I can see both side mirrors perfectly. As Mark shifts into second gear, the truck jerks the cab and slightly knocks us around. I readjust myself and just happen to look at the mirrors again. The moon is bright enough to where I can see the overpass, but I don't see the car on either mirror. I say nothing. Back on the road, the three of us sit there in silence, as we listen to the old couple talk as though it's only them two around. The woman sitting on the man's lap sideways, twisting her torso so she can hug him. They're speaking as though they haven't seen each other in years, switching from English to Spanish and back. The man is saying how much he's thought about her while he was away at war, all the dreams he had of her, and that he can't wait for the wedding. The woman smiling, kissing him after every word. Mark breaks our silence by asking, "So where am I going?" But he never looks at them. "Just a little further down," the man said quickly, and goes back to talking to the woman. My head is facing straight ahead. I'm just staring at the couple, observing them. This couldn't be playful banter. About 15 miles have passed and Mark asked them the same question about 3 times, before the old man finally changes his answer. "Yeah, just get off here and then take a left. Another half a mile and straight, and we'll be there." Back to the old woman. He repeated his same lines to her over and over again, and she's responding as though it's the first time that she's heard those words. We finally made it to Swinney Switch around midnight. We approached an old general store with one light illuminating the parking lot. It's the only one in the area. The passenger side of the road is a heavily wooded area with no visible roads. Okay, right here is good. We slowed down and stopped on the road next to the general store. The old couple slowly get off the truck. First the man, then the woman. They close the door and Mike's wife reclaims her seat. She looked out of the window and noticed that the couple is still there in front of the wooded area, smiling, waving. Mark slowly makes a U-turn into the store's parking lot and back out onto the road. Mark's wife and I are still watching the couple waving at us until the trailer blocks our view. But by the time we made the turn, they were gone. We could have seen them walk into the store, but we didn't. It's as though they just vanished. They couldn't have ran even if they wanted to. But why would they anyway? Why walk into the woods? We finally got back to I-37. None of us said a word for a while. I looked at Mark and asked, "So where do you think they went?" "Shut up, I don't want to talk about it," he tells me in a stern voice, never taking his eyes off the road. Over the next few months, I tried to get him to tell the story at family gatherings, and I got the same response every time.
I have a real-life internet stalker. First off, I would like to state that I am a 16-year-old female and I live in a small town in New York. I'm short for my age. I'm 5'3" and I weigh 124 pounds. These events have been going on for around 2 years now. I will be using the name Ariel as my name to protect my identity. I have always been very active on the internet, since I was about 8 to 9 years old. When I was around 14, I decided to join this group chat on this website. I don't recall what it was called. It was a website where you could exchange each other's kicks, Skype, phone numbers, and stuff of that sort. Being the ignorant child I was, I put my information on the website. I used Kik and Skype. For some reason, I didn't give out my phone number. I only got a few people who actually replied and texted me on Kik and Skype, but none really stood out to me. Except one. There was this one older guy that started texting me. He claimed he was 16 years old, and he said his name was Alexander. We were mainly interested in the same things: video games, the outdoors, and anime. Everything was fine, or so I thought. We would text every day and we would talk about innocent things, like how our day was, and what we had planned for the weekend. Nothing too out of the ordinary. We would usually go from Kik to Skype pretty frequently. I would turn on my camera and he never turned on his. This was one sign I didn't pay attention to. After talking for 3 months, things started escalating. What I mean by that is that he started telling me to do sexual things on camera so he could see. When I would say no, he would say he knew where I lived. I had some common sense and ended the call right there and then. I was frightened because he never acted that way towards me. He ended up calling my Skype about 20 times. I had to shut down my computer because I couldn't take it anymore. I know what most of you are wondering. Where were my parents? Why weren't they parenting me not to talk to strangers and stuff like that? Well, let's just say my parents are very careless. Not in the way like they don't care about me or don't love me, because they love me a lot. They trusted me enough to let me have a phone and computer. Anyways, back to the story. Alexander started calling about 5 times every day, and if I didn't pick up, he would start texting my Kik. I didn't even think to block because I blocked him once before and he just kept creating a new Kik and a new Kik each time. I also had a Facebook. Yeah, a 14-year-old with a Facebook. Smart. Alexander ended up finding my Facebook. He would say things like, "I know where you live," and "I see you have your mom on Facebook." I ended up uninstalling Skype, Kik, and I ended up deactivating my Facebook. I went on with my life until a year later. I get a text to my phone from an unknown number that read, "Hi, sexy. Remember me? You looked amazing today in your tight dress with your black socks and hat." I replied with, "Who is this?" I thought it was one of my guy friends who was playing a prank on me to mess with me. I texted every one of my guy friends from my contact list, asking if they were messing around with me. They all replied with no. That's when everything hit the fan. I received all of these texts when I arrived home from school that day. I was wearing a tight dress, hat, and black socks. The number finally replied, "Honey, it's Alexander. Don't you remember? How could you forget? I finally get to have you all to myself." I looked at that text and almost threw up. I was beyond terrified. I locked all the doors. I was going to be home alone till around 6 p.m. I never texted the number back, and it kept texting me. I ended up blocking the number later and falling asleep. About a week later, I'm walking home from school on a hot day. Do you ever get that feeling where you feel like you're being followed/watched? That's the feeling I got. Of course, I was walking alone. I slowly turned my head. I tried to make it look like I was looking for a house number. I noticed a black car following behind me. I tightly hold on to my cell phone. I was planning to make a break for it as soon as I hit a certain street. A street that was 2 blocks away from my house. Let's call the street Shady Way. When I hit Shady Way, I booked it. I ran right behind the house that was behind my house. I ran in through the back door, slamming it shut behind me. I was crying. I locked every door and ran to my bedroom upstairs. I felt so sick. That's when I felt my phone buzz. The next text disturbed me and will haunt me for the rest of my life. It read as follows: "I know where you live. Even inside, you can't hide from me." I called 911. I explained that a guy who claimed to be 16 when I was talking to him is an old man. Now he found where I lived. The operator said a police officer was 5 minutes away. It felt like forever. I heard a hard knock at the door and ran downstairs. I opened the door and it was the officer. The officer explained that they saw a suspicious black car drive by, but couldn't get the license plate because it took off. Officers around here are practically useless. I ended up telling my mom and dad what happened. They just said we would file a report and have some hope that he would get caught. What could we charge him with? He never laid a hand on me. Every day I walked from my home to my school. I practically lived in a constant state of fear and anxiety. Even writing this now gives me anxiety. I could never have a friend or a parent drive me, and I was too young to drive, so walking was the only way. My grades were starting to slip away at school. I didn't stay awake in my classes. My life was falling apart. I never slept at night, so I slept in classes. Every day I could have sworn I would see that man or Alexander, or if that's even his name. I did have some friends to help me through this time. It felt like my friend, who we'll call Violet, understood me. Violet was a sweet and understanding girl. She was only 1 year older than me at the time. I invited her over one weekend where my parents would be out of town. We stayed up late into the morning hours, and I gossiped about guys and everything else girls usually talk about at sleepovers. Then, it happened. My phone goes off. I grab it. I gasp as I read what was on the screen. "Hi, Ariel. How are you? I see you're home alone with your friend, Violet." I have had enough of this at this point, so I reply as Violet begs me not to feed into what he wants. "Oh, you're watching me? Ha! Okay. Where am I right now? What am I wearing?" He quickly replies, "You're in your bedroom. You're wearing a shirt with a skull on it with shorts. Your friend is wearing a white t-shirt and shorts too." I pause, thinking of what to say next. I'm very scared. I end up calling my mom and dad to come home early. I ended up explaining what happened. I was scared and so was Violet. My family and I couldn't do anything. He didn't hurt any one of us. A few months later, we ended up moving for financial reasons. We moved to another small town in New York. I ended up forgetting about Alexander for a while. It was peaceful and I didn't worry about having to watch my back every second. About a week ago, I received another message from an unknown number.
I'd like to give special thanks to Margbot for reading with me on this story. If you don't know her already, then go check out her channel because she is amazing. Thank you for joining me as well for my very first collaboration video. It's great seeing so many of you coming back to watch me again and again. And if you're new here, then welcome. If you'd like to see some more from me, then here's some suggestions. And if you'd like to subscribe, then please do click on my little jug of creep sauce. And remember to click on the little bell icon too if you want some notifications every time I upload something new. See you next time, Creepsters.